God made a promise to Abraham and Sarah. God called Abraham and Sarah out of their home in the city of Ur to the land of Canaan. And God took Abraham and told him, "Look to the heavens and count the stars. Look to the deserts and count the grains of sand. So shall your descendants be, exceedingly numerous. And this land will belong to them from north to south and east to west, for a peaceful day to day." And Abraham protested and said, "But I'm old, and Sarah is old, and we don't have any children, and if we don't have any kids, then our kids probably won't have any kids either." And God told him, "You and Sarah will have a son, and you will name him Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him." And a while later, Abraham and Sarah had a son, and they named him Isaac, and they loved him. Later, years later, God said to Abraham, "Take your son, Isaac, who is your only son and who you love, to the land of Moriah. Kill him, burn him, and sacrifice him to me." And so, early one morning, Abraham put a saddle on his donkey and gathered some wood for the fire and took his son Isaac, and they went to Moriah. They traveled for 3 days. And when they got near the place, they got off the donkey and they walked. Isaac carried the wood, Abraham carried the knife and the fire. And Isaac said, "Father Abraham, we're going to this place to make a sacrifice to God." And Abraham said, "Yes." And Isaac said, "It's just that I've noticed we haven't brought anything to sacrifice." And Abraham said, "Don't worry about it." And when Abraham and Isaac got to the place in the land of Moriah, Abraham built an altar and laid out the wood and wrestled his son to the ground and tied him up and laid him on the altar, and Abraham raised the knife. And who writes a story like this? Who turns a story like this into Scripture? People have spent a lot of time with this story. People have struggled with this story. There's the version where Abraham knows for sure that God won't really let him go through with it. Where Abraham knows for sure that God will provide an alternative, where Abraham doesn't really intend to kill his son. There's the one where God is waiting for Abraham to argue, where God is waiting for Abraham to say something, where God is waiting for Abraham to protest. There's the one that's about why we don't sacrifice children anymore. There's the one that's about what God will do when he puts his own son on the cross. And none of those versions, none of those readings, none of those interpretations, none of those attempts to salvage this story make this story okay. Because there is nothing okay about Abraham building the altar and laying out the wood and wrestling his son to the ground and tying him up and laying him on the altar. And there is nothing okay about Abraham raising the knife. And some stories are like that. I have stories that I don't like. Some of them are just embarrassing. Some of them are bad. Some of them involve hurting other people. And most of the time, I don't think about them. But they are filed away in my memory, and sometimes my brain likes to take one of them out and put it on a pedestal and light it perfectly. And say, hey, remember that time you did that thing? Let's think about that for a few hours. And I wish that my brain would not do that. I wish that I could go through my memories and find the ones that I like and the ones that I need and put them on pedestals and light them perfectly so that they would always be right there. And find the ones that are okay and not so important and put them in the archives. And find the ones that I don't like and throw them away. But I also know that those memories are part of who I am. And I don't know who I would be without them. I am not the best thing I have ever done, or the best thing that has ever happened to me. I'm not the worst thing I've ever done, or the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I am all those things and everything in between and more. And yes, it's a jumbled mess. And yes, there are parts that I don't like. And yes, there are stories that are not okay. But that is who I am. And I am loved and worthy of love. And it's not just me. It's you, too. And it's our church, and it's our community, and it's our country. We are not our best stories. We are not our worst stories. We are all of them and everything in between and more. And we are loved and worthy of love. But it is important to remember that those stories, the ones that we don't like, the ones where we build altars and lay out the wood or wrestle someone to the ground or tie them up or lay them on the altar, the ones where we raise the knife, are part of that jumbled, holy, beloved mess. And that is why I am glad that this story is in the Bible. That's why I'm glad that someone wrote this story, that someone decided to call it Scripture, because we are Christians and we do not shy away from hard stories. We put them on pedestals. We light them perfectly. We say, hey, look at this. This is part of who we are. It's not where the story ends, of course. As Abraham steeled himself to do the thing, to kill, to burn, and to sacrifice, an angel of the Lord called to him and said, "Stop! Don't lay a hand on your son." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram whose horns were caught in a thicket, and Abraham untied Isaac and brought him down from the altar, and together they put the ram on the altar and killed it and burned it and sacrificed it. Which is also a little troubling, but... And then they walked back to the donkey and they went on their way. And it's not in the Bible. No one wrote this story. No one turned this story into Scripture, but I hope that at some point on that journey, Abraham turned to Isaac and maybe explained what he had done and what he was thinking. Maybe said that he wasn't ever really going to go through with it. Maybe said that he should have argued, that he should have said something, that he should have protested. But even if he didn't do any of that, that he told Isaac that he was deeply sorry and meant it. And that Isaac told Abraham that he forgave him and meant it. And that over the weeks and months and years ahead, they did the hard work of restoring their relationship. Their relationship that would always bear the scar of that trip to Moriah, and their relationship that could be more than that. Because that's the thing, isn't it? We are not our worst stories. We are loved and we are worthy of love. And because we know that we are not our worst stories, and because we know that we are loved and worthy of love, we are not so ashamed that we cannot apologize and make reparations. And we are not so broken that we cannot forgive. The good news is that God's love, God's big, abundant, bold, reckless, wild, dangerous, full of grace, capital L, all caps, big, giant, run out of ink font love, frees us from the clutches of our worst stories and the seductions of our best stories. God's love frees us to make amends, and God's love frees us to let go as individuals, as communities, as nations. And that freedom, founded in love, opens up the glorious possibility of building God's kingdom here on earth, a kingdom where we can embrace all of our stories, the good and the bad and the in-between, and show each other that all of us are loved and worthy of love. And that is good news indeed.